The moment you start thinking for yourself, you become dangerous. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've stopped agreeing with what's expected of you. That's how it begins. Not with betrayal, not with violence, but with a quiet shift inside your mind. You stop apologizing for being honest. You stop nodding along when you disagree, or you stop shrinking to make others comfortable. And suddenly, to the people who once benefited from your silence, you've become a problem. That's the moment your story starts to twist, the moment the narrative turns, and you quietly, almost imperceptibly, become the villain. We live in a world where perception matters more than truth. You don't need to be wrong to be hated. You just need to stop being useful. That's the first psychological law of social dynamics. Utility determines morality. People call you good when your actions serve their interest. The moment they don't, the same behavior becomes selfish, arrogant, cold. The same honesty they once praised becomes rude. The same strength they admired becomes intimidating. You haven't changed. Their benefit has. That's the quiet cruelty of human psychology. We don't judge people by their character. We judge them by how they make us feel. From an existential point of view, the villain is not a person, it's a mirror. It reflects back everything people don't want to admit about themselves. When you stop conforming, you show them their own weakness. When you speak truth, you expose their denial. When you draw boundaries, you remind them they have none. So they project their discomfort onto you. They call you toxic because they can't control you. They call you selfish because you stopped serving. They call you the villain because they can't stand seeing you free. The truth is, in every story where you're painted black, you were probably the only one who saw things clearly. There's a psychological concept called cognitive dissonance. It's what happens when people encounter a truth that contradicts their comfort. Instead of facing it, their mind rejects it. It's easier to demonize the messenger than to face the message. You become the villain, not because you lied, but because you refuse to maintain their illusion. In relationships, this is especially brutal. When you start expressing your needs after years of silence where, the other person doesn't see growth, they see rebellion. They were addicted to your compliance. And addicts always hate the withdrawal phase. So they tell everyone you changed, that you became cold. But what really happened is that you stopped letting yourself be controlled. From a psychological standpoint, this transformation follows a pattern. Compliance phase. You try to please everyone. You equate love with approval. Awakening phase. You start noticing manipulation, double standards, hypocrisy. Boundary phase. You begin saying no, reclaiming your energy, walking away. Rebellion labeling phase. People frame your boundaries as betrayal. Isolation phase. You're misunderstood, sometimes even hated, but liberated. This is the silent evolution of the self, a journey from social acceptance to self-acceptance. It's the price every self-aware mind must pay. And it's precisely why existential thinkers like Sartre, Nietzsche, and Camus were seen as rebels or even villains in their time. They questioned the structures everyone depended on. They challenged moral comfort. They refused to play along. Existentialism says you are condemned to be free. meaning your freedom will isolate you. Because most people don't want to see someone living authentically. Why? It reminds them of how much they've compromised. Let's get darker, more honest. People don't love you. They love the version of you that agrees with them. They love the parts that make them feel seen, safe, superior. The moment you stop performing that version, love becomes resentment. That's why many intelligent, empathetic people break down emotionally. They spend years being the good one. They maintain peace at the cost of their own mental balance. They think their kindness will earn loyalty. But loyalty isn't earned by goodness, it's earned by power. And power is the one thing the good rarely claim. This is the tragedy of self-aware souls. You can see both sides of every story, so you blame yourself for everything. You understand others' pain so deeply that you excuse their cruelty. And when you finally stop, when you finally choose yourself, you get labeled as heartless. But that's not heartlessness. That's survival. The villainization of the self-aware mind is one of the most predictable outcomes of psychological evolution. Every person who starts seeing through manipulation, every person who stops being emotionally available to users, every person who starts saying, "I deserve peace," will sooner or later become the villain in someone else's story. Because here's the harsh truth. Your awakening ruins someone's control. Your healing destroys their narrative. Your independence breaks their dependency. And to them, that's unforgivable. Here's the deeper psychological insight. When people call you the problem, what they really mean is, "You've stopped allowing me to benefit at your expense." They can't admit that, so they moralize it. They turn selfishness into a virtue, but only for themselves. They weaponize guilt. They rewrite the story so that you look cruel, and they look like the victim. That's why being self-aware feels lonely. Not because you're wrong, but because clarity isolates. It cuts through illusion, and illusion is what binds most people together. You'll notice something fascinating when you step into awareness, how fragile relationships really are when truth enters the room. People who swore they'd stand by you will vanish. Those who praised your honesty will flinch when it's aimed at them. And you'll realize they didn't love you. They loved the role you played. That's why smart, introspective people so often find themselves hated, misunderstood, or abandoned, not because they failed, but because they refused to keep pretending. The irony? The same people who villainize you will one day imitate you. They'll quote your words. They'll follow your boundaries. They'll preach your strength, just not while you're around to remind them how small they felt in your light. So when they call you cold, let them. When they call you arrogant, smile. When they say you've changed, say thank you, because that's what evolution looks like to those who stay stagnant. Every step toward authenticity will be framed as aggression by those who depend on your compliance. Let them write their version of the story. You don't owe them your silence to protect their comfort. You owe yourself the truth. The first thing you feel when they turn on you isn't anger, it's guilt. That quiet, heavy guilt that creeps in like fog, thick, shapeless, suffocating. You start asking yourself, did I go too far? Was I really the problem? You replay every word, every look, every silence. You try to find the exact moment when you lost their love. But here's the cruel truth. You didn't lose their love. You lost their control. That's what guilt does to good minds. It turns self-awareness against you. Because unlike the manipulative, you actually reflect. You analyze. You care. And that empathy, that constant reflection, becomes the perfect weapon against you. They know it too. Consciously or not, they sense your conscience. So they push it. They frame their pain as your fault. They act wounded by your growth. They twist your boundaries into betrayal. And you being kind, being intelligent, being human, try to fix what you didn't break. That's the paradox of self-aware people. Your mind is both your strength and your cage. You can see the psychology behind everything, but you still feel responsible for it. Let's go deeper into the mechanism of this guilt. Psychologically, guilt is one of the most powerful tools of social control. It's how parents train obedience, how religion maintains devotion, how society enforces conformity. Guilt makes you self-police. No one has to punish you. You do it yourself. When you begin to detach, when you start reclaiming your voice more, people trigger guilt as a survival response. It's like an alarm system. Come back to your role. Remember who you were. Don't you dare evolve. They remind you of everything they did for you. Every favor, every memory, every moment of kindness, as if gratitude means servitude, as if love means obligation. And because you have a conscience, you pause, you soften, you almost go back. But then you realize they never apologized for how they used you. They only reminded you of how you served them. That's not love. That's leverage. Here's something most people never understand. Being a villain in someone's story doesn't make you wrong. It just means you've stepped outside their narrative. Every social system, family, friends, relationships, even culture, functions on unspoken contract. You play a role that benefits the system. When you deviate, you threaten the balance. That's when the collective mind does what it always does. It creates a villain. Society needs villains. They're psychological dumping grounds, containers for the anxiety and hypocrisy people can't face. You see it everywhere. In religion, the devil carries the blame. In politics, the opposition becomes evil. In relationships, the one who walks away becomes heartless. We build our peace on someone else's demonization. It's how fragile egos survive. And so, when you step out of line, when you grow beyond the script, you become that projection. You carry everyone's unprocessed pain. People who can't take responsibility for their mistakes need you to be the monster. It makes their story easier to live with. You'll notice this pattern. Every time you heal, someone gets angry. Every time you find peace, someone calls you selfish. Every time you stop explaining, someone accuses you of arrogance. They don't want you healed. They want you manageable. Because healing means you start seeing manipulation for what it is. And manipulation can't survive clarity. Existentially speaking, this is the human tragedy. We crave truth, but we fear what it costs. We preach authenticity, but we punish those who live it. That's why freedom feels lonely, because the moment you step outside the system of validation, you stop belonging. Society doesn't know how to love free people at all. It only knows how to reward obedience. And that's why so many intelligent people spend their lives pretending, smiling, agreeing, performing goodness, just to avoid being cast out. They don't want to be misunderstood. They don't want to be the villain. But here's the secret no one tells you. You will always be misunderstood by the unhealed, because your peace exposes their chaos. Your independence reminds them of their chains. Your truth echoes where they've buried theirs. Let's take this deeper into psychology. There's a concept called projection, when people attribute their own flaws or feelings to someone else. It's how the guilty stay innocent in their own story. The liar calls you dishonest. The manipulator says you're toxic. The control freak says you've changed. Projection is psychological camouflage. It allows people to maintain their self-image while destroying yours. And when you defend yourself, you look defensive. When you explain, you look guilty. When you stay silent, they claim that's proof. That's the trap. You can't win in their narrative, because the story was never written for your truth. The only way out is to stop playing the role entirely, to accept being misunderstood, to wear the label they give you and walk away anyway. Let's pause for a moment. Ask yourself this. How many times have you tried to explain your side to people who were never listening? How many times did you water yourself down just to stay liked? And what did it cost you? The peace you never got back. The sleep you lost trying to justify yourself. The identity you erased trying not to offend. We spend half our lives trying to be seen by people who have already decided who we are. That's not connection, that's performance. And that's why villain becomes your liberation. Because when they stop seeing you as good, you finally stop trying to prove it. From here, something profound happens. You begin to reclaim your inner authority. You stop waiting for permission to exist. You stop seeking validation from those who profit from your self-doubt. It's like removing layers of old programming. The need to please, the fear of being disliked, the obsession with being understood. This is where most people get scared, the in-between phase. Yeah, you're no longer the person they shape, but you're not yet the version you'll become. It's quiet here, empty, painful, but it's real. This is where the self rebuilds. Existentialism says meaning isn't found, it's created. That's what this phase is. You building meaning from your own choices, not others' expectations. Psychologically, this is individuation, Carl Jung's term for the process of becoming whole. It means integrating your light and shadow, accepting the parts you've hidden to stay acceptable. You stop dividing yourself into good and bad. You realize you're capable of both kindness and cruelty, truth and deceit, compassion and anger. And that doesn't make you evil, it makes you human. Ironically, this wholeness is what people fear most, because they were taught to equate goodness with weakness. So when they see you unbothered, unashamed, unapologetic, they call it arrogance. When they see you calm in your solitude, they call it coldness. When they see you free, they call it dangerous. And they're right. Freedom is dangerous. To the systems built on fear, authenticity is rebellion. The truth is, you will never be loved by everyone. You will never be understood by most. And You will always be the villain in some story you never wrote. But once you accept that, something powerful happens. You stop living defensively, see. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop giving people the script they'll use to destroy you. You start speaking truth without calculating who it might upset. You start setting boundaries without guilt. You start walking away without explaining, because you finally realize you don't owe anyone your submission just to prove you have a heart. That's where guilt dies. That's where self-ownership begins. The moment you understand that being misunderstood is not failure, it's freedom. You stop playing their game entirely, because the real villains were never the ones who broke free. They were the ones who needed control so badly. They turned every act of independence into betrayal. And you were just brave enough to leave the script behind. There comes a moment quiet, almost invisible, when you stop defending yourself. You don't announce it. You don't post about it. It just happens. Like a door inside you clicks shut. That's when the healing starts, not when you forgive them, not when they apologize, but when you finally understand that you don't need to explain your truth to those committed to misunderstanding it. And that silence, it scares them more than your anger ever did, because your silence means clarity. It means you've seen through the performance, their guilt, their tears, their selective memory. You've decoded the manipulation behind every "I didn't mean it." You've realized that most people don't want peace. They want control disguised as reconciliation. You stop giving them that. You stop giving them the audience they crave. You stop being their mirror. Psychologically, this phase is detachment, the withdrawal of emotional investment from toxic systems. It feels brutal at first, because for so long your worth was tied to being needed. Now you're learning the strange, uneasy art of being free. Freedom sounds beautiful until you have it. Then it's quiet. Then it's heavy. Then it asks you to sit with everything you ran from, your loneliness, your doubts, your buried anger. You realize how much of your life was shaped by other people's expectations. Your tone, your timing, your dreams, your silence. You were trained to survive, not to exist. And now that the noise is gone, you hear yourself for the first time, and it's terrifying. The mind doesn't know how to process peace at first. It tries to recreate chaos. You'll catch yourself scrolling through old messages, replaying the same arguments in your head, craving a fight just to feel familiar pain. That's trauma, not connection. The brain addicted to drama doesn't want peace. It wants patterns. It wants the comfort of pain it understands. But here's where growth begins, when you stop mistaking exhaustion for loyalty. When you start realizing that some people never loved you, they just loved your compliance. The psychological term for this is intermittent reinforcement, the same system casinos use. You never know when you'll get rewarded, so you keep trying. You keep showing up, hoping this time they'll see your worth. And that's how they keep you, half starved for validation, half convinced it's love. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. You start understanding your own patterns, the need to fix, to explain, to please. You see how manipulation didn't start with them. It started the first time you learned that being loved meant being small. There's a psychological awakening in this stage, a quiet, existential kind of rebirth. You realize you can live without their approval. You realize peace feels foreign because you've never had it. You start relearning how to breathe without performing. And then something unexpected happens. You stop craving closure. Closure isn't real. It's a myth built for people who can't accept that not all stories end neatly. You won't get the apology. You won't get the acknowledgement. You won't get the "you were right." But you get something better. You get your power back. Power in psychology isn't dominance, it's self-possession. It's the ability to choose your reaction, to not flinch every time someone withdraws affection, to not chase after those who weaponize silence. That's the real freedom. Not proving, not explaining, but knowing. Knowing what you bring, knowing what you won't tolerate, knowing that love without respect is just control in costume. The ones who called you cold will never understand that peace is not indifference. It's the refusal to keep bleeding for people who enjoy watching. Now, existentially, this is where you confront your own shadow. The villain they painted you as isn't entirely false, huh? It's just exaggerated, distorted, simplified. Because, yes, you did stop answering every call. You did stop tolerating lies. You did start saying no. But those are not sins. They're symptoms of awakening. Every boundary sounds cruel to the one who benefited from your lack of it. So you learn to wear the title villain with quiet pride. Not because you want to hurt anyone, but because you finally understand the difference between kindness and submission. You can be both gentle and immovable, folk. You can love deeply and still walk away. You can forgive silently and still never return. That's evolution, not bitterness. You start noticing the world differently now. You see through conversations how people hide control under concern, how pity is used as currency, how morality is often just social strategy. You realize most people aren't honest not because they're evil, but because they're afraid. Afraid of rejection, of being alone, of being exposed. So they lie to survive. And that's when you stop hating them. You stop wanting revenge. Because you finally understand they're trapped too. They're not villains or heroes, they're scared. Scared of facing themselves without a mask. That's the moment of transcendence, when you stop fighting shadows and start mastering your own. Psychologically, this is called integration, the merging of all the parts you've suppressed. The side that loves deeply, the side that destroys illusions, the side that no longer performs humility just to feel accepted. When you integrate, you stop splitting people into good and bad. You stop splitting yourself too. You realize every human carries the capacity for cruelty and compassion, and pretending otherwise only makes it worse. So you live differently now. Quieter, simpler, realer. You don't explain your peace anymore, you protect it. You don't debate your intentions, you let your absence explain itself. You don't chase understanding because truth doesn't need witnesses. And then, one day, you look back. The chaos, the tears, the accusations, they feel distant now, like someone else's dream. You see the people who once called you selfish, still stuck in the same loops, telling the same stories, looking for new villains to hate. You no longer fit there. you've outgrown the narrative. And that's when the strangest feeling washes over you. Gratitude, not for the pain, but for the awakening it forced. For the clarity you never would have found if they hadn't cast you out. They thought they exiled you, but really, they freed you. Existentialism says we find meaning through suffering, but only if we face it consciously. Pain becomes transformation when you stop running from it, when you let it carve wisdom instead of resentment. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what did this teach me about human nature? And the lesson is always the same. Everyone's playing a role until they wake up. Some play the victim, some play the hero, and some, like you, get forced into the villain's mask only to realize it was the only role that could set them free. By now, you see how the system works. Morality isn't truth, it's social management. Good and evil are often just two words humans invented to justify who's in control. You start creating your own compass. You stop asking, is this good? And start asking, is this real? Because truth is rarely good, and good is rarely true. But real will always set you free. And in that freedom, you finally find what you were searching for all along. Not peace that depends on others, but peace that cannot be taken away. The moment you stop needing to be seen is the moment you truly arrive. It doesn't happen with fanfare. It's not a cinematic revelation. It's quieter than that, like waking up one morning and realizing the storm inside you has finally gone still. The world didn't change. You did. All those years of being misunderstood, blamed, used, and mislabeled, they weren't punishment. They were purification. They burned away every illusion of control, every false layer of goodness you wore to stay safe. And what's left now is something terrifyingly honest. You, not the version you perform, not the version you shaped for love or survival. Just the raw, unfiltered consciousness that remains when everything else collapses. This is where the villain becomes something else entirely. Not evil, not broken, but awake. Psychologically, this is the point of self-actualization. Maslow wrote about it, Jung hinted at it, Nietzsche screamed it into existence. It's when you stop living for validation and start living for alignment. You realize your actions are not about being good, they're about being true. You're no longer trying to be the light in someone else's darkness. You've learned to hold your own flame even if it casts strange shadows. And that changes everything. You stop chasing love and start choosing it. You stop seeking approval and start embodying truth. You stop fearing solitude because you've realized it's not loneliness, it's sovereignty. That's what people misunderstand about awakening. It's not about transcending the world. It's about walking through it, unmasked. There's a strange beauty in becoming who you truly are. Not everyone will like it. In fact, most won't. Because authenticity disrupts systems built on lies. When you speak truth, it threatens those who've built comfort in denial. When you live without seeking permission, it offends those who rely on hierarchy. When you choose peace over drama, it frustrates those who feed on conflict. And yet, you no longer care. Not out of apathy, but because you finally understand compassion doesn't require self-destruction. You can love people without lowering your frequency to meet theirs. You can forgive without allowing re-entry. You can understand their pain without absorbing it. That's emotional intelligence, the quiet kind no one teaches you. The kind that saves your mind. Now, something strange happens after you detach. The same people who called you arrogant start calling you different. They sense something they can't name, calm maybe, power maybe. But it's not power over anyone. It's power within. You don't react anymore, Vaugh. You respond. You don't chase chaos. You observe it. They try to pull you back into the old roles: guilt, pity, obligation. But you see the pattern now. You recognize manipulation not as evil, but as fear wearing armor. And because you understand it, it no longer owns you. That's what makes you dangerous now, not your strength, but your serenity. Because you've become immune to the emotional games that once drained you. You don't feed on validation anymore. You feed on clarity. Existentially, this is the final stage of individuation, when you integrate not just your pain, but your purpose. You realize your story was never about proving innocence. It was about remembering identity. Every betrayal became a mirror. Every accusation became an invitation to see where you still sought approval. Every villain label was just a compass pointing back to yourself. And now, standing in the wreckage of what you used to be, you understand they never destroyed you. They refined you. You are not what happened to you. You are what you chose to become after. Let's talk about choice, because that's where psychology meets philosophy. We live in a culture obsessed with blame. Everyone wants to find a cause for their suffering parents, trauma, society, fate, and yes, those things shape us. But they do not define us. The only thing that defines you is choice. Every time you decided to walk away instead of prove your worth, every time you chose peace over performance, every time you stayed true to your silence instead of their chaos, you were rewriting your script. You were no longer reacting to life, you were directing it. That's the moment you stopped being the villain and started becoming the author. And here's the paradox of awakening. The freer you become, the more misunderstood you'll be. You'll be called distant for valuing peace. You'll be called selfish for setting boundaries. You'll be called cold for no longer participating in dysfunction. But you'll know better now. You'll recognize those accusations for what they are, the language of those still imprisoned by their need for control. You'll smile quietly, not in superiority, but in understanding, because you've been there. You've lived their confusion. You know what it's like to mistake love for dependency, truth for cruelty, freedom for loneliness. You'll feel compassion, but you won't go back. Psychologically, this detachment isn't avoidance, it's transcendence. It's the ability to witness without absorbing, to care without carrying, to see through the game without needing to play. It's not numbness, it's mastery. You've spent so long analyzing others, their motives, their lies, their masks, that you've finally mastered the one mind that matters, your own. You don't seek control anymore because you understand control is the opposite of connection. You don't seek dominance because dominance is just another form of fear. You seek presence. You seek awareness. You seek reality, raw, unfiltered, sometimes painful, but real. And that makes you unstoppable. Existentially, that's enlightenment not in a spiritual cliche, but in the purest human sense. Seeing the world exactly as it is and loving it anyway. Not because it's perfect, but because you no longer need it to be. You've made peace with contradiction. You've accepted that being good was never the goal, being whole was. You've accepted that love without loss is fantasy, that growth without pain is illusion, that truth without oscillation is impossible. You've accepted the human condition, and in doing so, you've transcended it. Now you live differently. You move slower. You speak less. You listen more. You don't try to save anyone. You simply live as proof that it's possible to survive truth and stay kind. People will still misunderstand you. They'll still whisper. They'll still project. But it won't touch you anymore, because once you've faced your own darkness, no one else's can scare you. That's the final freedom, to walk through a world of masks with your soul unhidden. And maybe one day, someone will hear your story, not as a warning, not as a tragedy, but as a testament, a reminder that sometimes, to find peace, you must first be willing to be hated. That to be true, you must first be willing to be misunderstood. That to become whole, you must first accept the villain they made you. Because only then do you realize they never exiled you from paradise. They freed you from illusion. And that's how the story ends, not with revenge, not with regret, but with quiet understanding. You were never the villain. You were just the one brave enough to stop pretending. Peace isn't paradise. It's emptiness at first. No one tells you that. They speak about healing as if it's a sunrise, but in reality, it's more like dusk. The light fades slowly, and the silence that follows feels foreign. After the war ends, the one you fought in your mind, your relationships, your identity, you're left standing in the quiet ruins of your old self. And you don't quite know what to do with that. There's no applause, no closure, no cinematic ending. Just you, your thoughts, and a stillness that feels both holy and hollow. You used to mistake chaos for life. Now, calm feels like absence. That's the hardest part of awakening, learning to breathe without the noise that wants to find you. You start noticing small things again. The sound of a clock ticking, the way sunlight falls through a curtain, the texture of air in the early morning, sharp, real, unfiltered. And for a while it feels uncomfortable because you were addicted to meaning. You wanted everything to have a reason, a lesson, a narrative. But now you realize life doesn't owe you coherence. Existentially, that's liberation. Psychologically, it's terrifying. You can't hide behind the story anymore. You can't call yourself the victim or the villain. You're just human. And that's harder than being either. You start to understand that peace isn't the opposite of pain. It's the acceptance of it. It's sitting with discomfort without trying to fix it. It's letting emotions move through you like weather, not controlling them, just observing. You realize that forgiveness isn't about moral superiority. It's just memory, losing its grip. You remember faces that once haunted you, their words, their betrayals, and instead of anger, you feel nothing. Not numbness, freedom. Because indifference in its purest form is healing. It's not that you don't care, it's that you no longer need to. Your social circle shrinks. Conversations get quieter. Superficiality feels suffocating now. You crave depth like oxygen, but not the performative kind. Not the deep talk that people post about online. You want silence that speaks, eyes that listen, presence without agenda. But that's rare. Most people are still performing. So you learn to enjoy solitude not as isolation, but as sanctuary. There's a sacred intimacy in being alone with yourself, and finally unafraid of what you might find there. Psychologically, you've entered what Carl Jung called the integration phase. It's where you stop identifying with either the light or the shadow. You just become aware of both, balanced, real. You no longer chase enlightenment like a prize. You understand it's just radical honesty with yourself, your motives, your wounds. You see that every decision you make is born from either love or fear. And now, for the first time, you can tell the difference. That's power, not dominance, but awareness. Not control, but clarity. You start working again, but slower. You stop trying to build an empire and start trying to build a life. You find beauty in ordinary things. A coffee cup, a morning walk, a conversation that doesn't demand anything from you. And that's when it hits you. This simplicity is what you were chasing all along. The chaos, the striving, the overthinking, all of it was a search for something you already had, but couldn't feel while you were busy proving your worth. Now you understand the real tragedy of being human. We spend half our lives trying to become someone else, only to realize peace was just being ourselves the whole time. But you also notice something darker. Once you're free, you see how trapped everyone else is, how conversations are just rehearsed, performances, how people seek validation like oxygen, how manipulation has become normal, and honesty feels like rebellion. You try to talk about it, but your words sound foreign to them, too cold, too detached, too negative. So you stop trying. You realize not everyone wants truth. Some people only want comfort, and truth destroys comfort. That's why you'll always be the villain in someone's story, not because you're wrong, but because you refuse to live a lie. You stop needing to defend yourself. Silence becomes your weapon. Composure becomes your rebellion. You move through the world like a ghost, unbothered, grounded, aware, and it confuses people. They can't read you anymore. You're too calm to provoke, too self-contained to manipulate. They say, you've changed. And for the first time, you don't argue. You simply say, yes. Because you know what they really mean is, you're no longer who I can control. Existentially, this is transcendence through detachment. It's not coldness, it's clarity. It's the realization that love isn't about attachment, it's about presence. That power isn't about domination, it's about stillness. You stop needing to win arguments because peace is more valuable than being right. You stop explaining yourself because understanding is not your responsibility. You stop chasing closure because closure is just another form of control. And this quiet, steady indifference is not the absence of emotion. It's emotional maturity in its highest form. You begin to love differently, not for validation, not for escape, but for recognition. You see people not as saviors or threats, but as reflections of where you once stood. You love without expectation. You let go without resentment. You care without attachment. Because now you understand that love and freedom are not opposites. They're the same thing when expressed without fear. Some nights you still feel the echoes, the loneliness, the nostalgia, the weight of all that came before. Healing doesn't erase pain. It teaches you to live with it gracefully. You sit with your ghosts now. You don't chase them away. You just let them sit beside you until they fade into silence. And maybe that's what peace really is. Not the absence of pain, but the absence of resistance to it. You become a mirror now, reflecting truth even when it hurts. You no longer need to be seen. You just need to be real. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. It begins with silence again. Not the kind that follows noise, but the kind that has always been there, hidden beneath everything you once thought mattered. It's strange, isn't it? How life continues even after meaning dies. The world still moves. The sun still rises. People still chase and cry and laugh. But you've stopped searching for something in it because you realized the search itself was the trap. You used to think the goal was happiness. Then you thought it was peace. Then wisdom. But now you see all of it was ego. The self trying to justify its own existence through achievement, through healing, through being better. The mind clinging to a purpose because it cannot bear the weight of its own pointlessness. And in this realization, you feel something that looks like despair, but isn't. It's liberation, disguised as emptiness. Because what if there is no meaning? What if the point of existence is simply to exist, to feel, to observe, to decay, to bloom, without asking why? For the first time, the question itself seems unnecessary. You sit with that thought for days, then weeks, and eventually it stops feeling like a wound. It becomes a quiet understanding that maybe this is what freedom really is, not knowing and being fine with it. The philosophers call this existential equilibrium, a state where meaninglessness no longer frightens you, where you stop needing to invent purpose and instead start living as if you were one with everything that ever was and will be. You're no longer separate from the world. You are the world, its cruelty, its beauty, its indifference. You start noticing the poetry in ordinary life again. The way rain hits a window, soft, persistent, temporary. The way people hurry down the street, as if the world will collapse if they don't get there in time. You no longer judge them. You used to. You used to think they were blind, asleep, delusional. Now you see they're just living, and that's enough. That's the irony of awakening. The more awake you become, the less you need others to wake up. You stop preaching. You stop explaining. You stop saving. Because you finally see no one needs saving. They're just experiencing life at their own level of awareness, the way you once did. And suddenly, the whole world feels softer. You begin to smile again, not the forced, polite kind, but the faint one that appears when something inside finally stops fighting. You laugh more. You stop analyzing every emotion. You stop intellectualizing pain. You just feel, fully, without editing yourself. That's when you realize how far you've come, from overthinking everything to simply existing through it. You used to dissect every emotion like a scientist. Now, You let it flow through you like a river. It comes, it goes. No resistance, no labels. And in that flow, there's peace that no ideology, no religion, no philosophy could ever give you. You start to see that morality was never truth. It was just survival disguised as virtue. That kindness and cruelty are not opposites, they're strategies. That every human being carries both God and the devil inside, and the line between them shifts with hunger, with love, with time. You stop fearing your darker self. You stop worshiping your lighter one, because both were masks, and you're done pretending. Now you simply are, not pure, not perfect, but real. There's a moment one night, you're alone, staring at nothing in particular, and you feel this strange, inexplicable calm. It's not happiness. It's not sadness. It's just presence unfiltered, complete. You realize you don't want to escape life anymore. You just want to see it clearly. You understand that life isn't about becoming anything. It's about remembering. Remembering that you were never separate from existence in the first place. That every heartbreak, every betrayal, every failure was the universe folding in on itself, trying to show you the mirror. And now at last, you can look at it without flinching. The world still calls you cold, detached. They say you've changed. But what they really mean is you've stopped feeding the illusion. You've stopped playing the roles. You've stopped needing validation to exist. And that's what terrifies them. Because when you stop needing others, you become something they can't control. Free. You become what most people fear, a human who no longer craves permission to live. So you move quietly through the world now. You work, you talk, you laugh, but nothing owns you anymore. You see manipulation not as evil, but as ignorance. You see arrogance not as strength, but as fear. You see love not as salvation, but as recognition. Everything has become transparent, not mystical, just clear. You've become invisible in a way that's almost divine. Not because you hide, but because you no longer need to be seen. And in that final understanding, you realized something beautiful, something devastating. You never needed to be the hero, or the villain, or anything in between. You just needed to be aware. The universe doesn't care who wins. It only cares that you saw it, fully, honestly, without distortion. That you lived awake, that you existed consciously. And in that awareness, you find what everyone else spends their lives chasing, not happiness, not peace, but truth, unfiltered, uncomfortable, infinite. And maybe that's the real ending, when you stop seeking a way out of life and instead start falling in love with it exactly as it is, flawed, fleeting, and achingly real. Because in that surrender, you are no longer the villain, no longer the savior, no longer even a name. You are the observer and the observed, the silence and the echo, the question and the answer, everything and nothing